Welcome back to Fund Your Future with DRS. This week we're talking about analyzing your income and kind of looking at your pay stubs, which is always something good to do from time to time. That I think a lot of us don't typically look at our pay stubs until something happens where you notice that your paycheck is maybe a little less or a little more than it used to be, or your marriage status changed, and you think, oh, I need to change my tax status. But it's good to look at it every once in a while, right?
Yeah, I think especially, I know folks that I've worked with who will look at it when they work overtime, or they'll look at it, at the end of the year because they're trying to figure out some, total. They're trying to preview their taxes or something like that. So they'll look at the pay stub and see everything that happened over the course of the year. There's a lot of relevant information there, but I think a lot of it doesn't change month to month for a lot of people. If you're working like a salary position, then it seems pretty steady, and then you remember, oh yeah, I got a pay raise, or I hit a step increase after a year or however long.
Yeah.
And you forget those things unless you actually go and look at the actual pay stub. I know I almost only look at it to see how much vacation I'm accruing. I don't know. I don't know why. It's like I'm always just curious, trying to remember, and I never remember how many hours of vacation I've accrued. So I feel like that's the only place I can find that information.
I had gotten married a couple of years ago, and so obviously that was a decision whether I wanted to. It's always that question of like, are we going to file jointly or separately, and yeah, and so just kind of making some of those tax decisions, and and then I was in there and looking at some of the donations that I was making to the combined fund drive, and then realized, oh yeah, that's right.
I'm still doing that. I've been doing that.
I'm still making a monthly donation there. It's like $5 or $10, but I was like, oh, that's right.
There's a lot of information like that, and I know we've recently, at least state employees have recently had a number of different, actually, I guess maybe that really applies to all public employees, having different mandatory sort of programs that have been added on as far as, what's that called? Like the paid family medical leave, additional reductions and things like that.
Yeah.
Features, benefits that we're paying for, and so our pay may fluctuate when additional features come into play like that.
I think I had this moment too last year where I was looking at it and going, gosh, maybe I want to like change my withholdings for the taxes at the end of the year, because we always end up getting like a pretty good chunk of change towards our taxes. And I was going through my budget and kind of doing some reassessing, and I'm like, maybe I could actually put that money away towards like paying off some credit cards right now. So kind of went in and changed my tax withholdings just so it was a little bit less.
Yeah, that's interesting. I read a book what was that called? It's like the Financial Diaries or something like that. And it was talking about how there was a lot of things, but one of the things that they recognized, because they were interviewing and following people for like a number of years and like all of their spending. And some people were using their refund as a forced savings mechanism, their tax refund as a forced savings mechanism. Like if I had that extra $50 in my check every month, I'd probably just spend it.
Right.
But if I let the government hold on to it and then I get it, then I'll pay off a bill at the time or something like that. And an interesting strategy. I think everybody approaches that differently, but it is something that you need to think about. If you, like in your example, if you get a refund of a couple $100 or $1,000 every year, that's income that you should be making sure you're taking into consideration in your budget.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, well, that an extra like $200 a month could actually make a big difference that I could put towards like credit card debt, things like that.
Especially public employees who are salaried employees, we just think about our pay being very steady. I get the same pay every 2 weeks, or same pay every twice a month, or once a month, depending on what your pay cycle is. But you forget about those other sort of more one-off payments. Tax return's a great one, but there all sorts of random windfalls that people might get, or we talked about working overtime, and then there's a lot of public employees. I think about like folks who work at Department of Corrections or folks who work in like Parks and Rec, where their work is actually much more seasonal, and they might be getting a significant amount of pay in the summer or winter or during certain peak times, and trying to figure out how to apply that to your budget over the course of the entire year.
You were talking about earlier that can be true for obviously park employees, but as well as teachers. That's a huge part of being a teacher working in the public school system, is having to plan for that little bit of extra time in the summer where you may not be making the same amount of income.
Yeah, and that's, I think, my wife works in the public school system, and I joke with her often about, like, she has no idea how much she gets paid, like, because it's just a set amount every month, but it's like there's not necessarily a correlation to, well, you only worked a week or two in December, but you still get the same amount of pay. And a lot of folks still have, even within the school systems, they might work as a coach or an extra assistant, or pick up an extra assignment. They might volunteer, or not volunteer because they're getting paid for it. Obviously, they're getting paid for it. But things like the science fair, things like that
pick up some extra hours.
Yeah. I ran into an old high school teacher last summer, and we were talking about retirement, because everybody, as soon as they find out that I work at DRS, they want to start talking about retirement. But he was telling me about how he was the driver's ed teacher for the school for decades. I mean, he's still the driver ed teacher, but he was when I was in school as well. And so he knows almost every student. And I always thought, man, that would be a rough job, like very scary, I imagine. But he did it because it was putting extra money in his pocket. It allowed him to go on bigger vacations, or put more towards his retirement, or pay off debt.
Right.
And he was just looking for opportunities to make additional money within the environment that he was already working in.
And you had like a personal example, right, where you were working a contract position?
Yeah, so I worked at Central Washington University for a couple of years, and the contract was only a 10-month contract every year. So it was great. I had July and August off every year, but my pay wasn't spread out through the year. I didn't get paid in July and August as well. And so I had to be really conscious of that, setting money aside, saving money throughout the year so that I would have money to go on vacation in the summer when I'd had time. I wasn't just, stuck at home. I could still pay my bills. And I think for some people some people that I worked with, it was a real challenge the first year going through that process of knowing, like, oh, it's June and my bank account's almost empty and I'm not going to get a check for a couple of months. And, you can find other opportunities possibly in the summer as well, for picking up other work. I mean, that was something I didn't take advantage of. I had all that time on my hands, and I could have picked up another job during that time period. I would, rather just go play, but.
Yeah, it kind of works into what we were going to talk about, which was side hustles.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people now are looking at side hustles, or either things on the internet. Obviously, things like Lyft and Uber have become a huge side hustle for people to make a little bit of extra income. And I think it's definitely worth looking into if you feel like you have a little bit of extra time, or you feel like you've cut back on your budget as much as you can, and you've asked for that extra raise, and you're still trying to figure out how to meet your goals. It's good to kind of consider what else you can do. Like I said, either online or in person.
I heard someone talk about this once. When people are sort of analyzing their budget, oftentimes people just think about having a spending problem, that they're spending too much. But this author, she was talking about, sometimes you have an income problem.
Yeah.
Which is tough to acknowledge, I think, sometimes, because your job is your job, and like you said, you can look for opportunities for raises or promotional opportunities, and sometimes looking for brand new jobs or looking for additional opportunities to increase your income is what people have to end up doing, and that can be tough. As you said, I think the thing that's really challenging is figuring out the time piece. Like, is this worth my time? To find this other income. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think sometimes we don't realize, it's hard to know like how much our time is worth, and maybe that extra $10 or $20 is worth it if you have credit card debt and you want to pay that down.
Totally.
If you're in a position that might be a little more financially stable, maybe it doesn't feel like it is as worth it. I don't know. I think that's a personal decision people have to think about.
You had called it was an income problem.
Yeah.
That, yeah. Sometimes you look at your budget and going, oh my gosh, I've cut back as much as I can, but I'm still not able to meet those particular goals. And sometimes, there's obviously societal factors at hand. But yeah, I think it's just kind of good to examine and being like, okay, well, what are some of the things I can do? And side hustles are a great way to do that.
Yeah, I think it's really about like what are all the different levers I can pull.
Yeah.
We talked previously about the spending side of it and looking at opportunities to lower your spending. Sometimes is also directly tied to income. We have a colleague. I don't know if you've ever talked to her about this, but she has a house and she rents out rooms in her house. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, you could say, well, that's reducing your spending. She's like cutting down on her mortgage that way. But it's an alternative way to look at it is that she's increasing her income by having this rental income. And so sometimes it's the same. It's two sides of the same coin, really. Yeah. And I think that's one thing that is worth thinking about, at least.
Part of it is analyzing future income in terms of the bigger picture. Of course, what our job focuses on, which is retirement.
Yeah.
Which is, again, starting to think about your income for retirement and how important that is to be able to put some money aside now so that you have that income later on down the road. I always like to think of it, as like getting yourself a gift for your future self. So I'm always thinking of like, what's going to help out future Jenny here,
That's funny you say it that way. I was just reading a book about I read a lot of personal finance books right now because of the work we do.
Yeah.
But the author was talking about like giving your future self a different name and like picturing the person, like, because you are going to be a different person when you're older, and thinking about like, yeah, exactly, what can I do to take care of that person?
Yeah.
And how are they going to feel about the decisions I'm making right now as well? I mean, it kind of goes both ways there. And I think one of the reasons that it's good to think about both your income and your spending, not just now, but also in retirement. It helps you think about what your retirement budget is going to be and what's my retirement income going to be.
Definitely.
Like those are pieces that help with those life transitions, because we have another colleague who oftentimes says that it's all just a math equation. It's just income minus expenses equals your savings.
Right.
And it can really be that simple, but you have to know each part of that equation. And I know a lot of folks are afraid of math, but it is relatively straightforward.
I was reading a book recently too that was also talking about those sort of simple equations, but just because it's simple, I mean, it's the same thing with like diet and exercise too. Even though we know like we're supposed to eat healthy and exercise, people don't necessarily do it. So it's simple in concept, but it's another thing to actually take those little steps. And so this book that I was reading that's called The Slight Edge is about kind of doing those very small things every day, like contributing to your retirement savings, yes, or going for a 5-minute walk, that are going to make a difference for your future self, and for just increase your how you experience life.
That's a super good analogy, because I think oftentimes and one of the reasons I think we both want to do this podcast is because oftentimes when people think about spending and income and budget, it feels restrictive in the same way that talking about a diet. Like,
definitely.
Like and really oftentimes people who have who've talked about being successful with dieting, it's not dieting, it's a lifestyle change or lifestyle design.
More of like your frame of reference, if you will.
Yeah. What habits are you going to set up that just become part of your normal life, whether it's walking 10 minutes a day, or whether it's putting 1% of your salary into DCP, or whatever those things that you can, on some level, automate, but then they become things that you're that you're doing for your future self. I really love that. I think that's a great way to think about, like, one of the things that I've been thinking about, the conversations we've been having, and something that we haven't necessarily talked about, we've kind of danced around, is this sort of idea of deferred gratification, and how that's really tough, because on some level it goes back to restriction. It goes back to that diet of, like, self-control, and not necessarily in a judgmental way. I think oftentimes with these things that we're talking about, people want to do something different, or they know the path they want to go on, and it's they don't quite know how to get there, or they're sometimes derailed. I know we talked a little bit about this on the spending conversation as well. Like, if I'm bored or angry or frustrated, I oftentimes end up spending, and some people end up eating, and those things can end up being not what you actually want to do, but in the moment they end up being what you do. And so the more you can automate and put those things in place that don't allow you to make those poor decisions, or the poor decisions might not have as much of an impact.
Yeah, like you really touched on automation, and while we're looking at, like, income and pay stubs, and that's like automating your savings is what a lot of is a great tip that a lot of people talk about, which is basically you take the beauty of the internet and online banking and everything now is that I can set up a direct deposit from my checking account that takes out $100, $200 and puts it over here into my savings account, and it just happens automatically, and it is so amazing.
No, that's
and
you can
I've
look
gone
at that on
now.
your paycheck too.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that with your paycheck, and I just do it through my bank account. But I've kind of gone, like, through the last year now, gone from just having like one checking account and one savings account to now having like two other savings accounts that I've kind of put one aside for like home improvement projects, and then one just more for like other sort of one for like vacation and fun things, and then one as an emergency savings kind of account. And so I have all of my automatic deposits, or whatever, transfers, if you will, that go to those accounts every month. So then you don't have to think about the savings.
Yeah.
And it's automatically taken out of your checking account. And so it's just a really easy way for people to save.
So when you do that, do you see that initially as savings? So, like, or do you see it as spending? Like, see it as future spending?
That's a good question. I think of it more as savings, I
Yeah,
guess.
I think that makes sense. It goes a little bit back to what we were talking about with, like, income being lumpy, but spending is also lumpy. Like,
Yes.
like my spending, when we were talking about budgeting, or we were talking about like what we spend money on, our savings can be inconsistent as well. Like that's not necessarily a bad thing. That we're saving and then we're going to spend out of that savings. But I know sometimes people ask, well, I just, like, I got my refund check, or I got this windfall. What should I do with it, and how do I save it? Versus spending. I've heard a lot of people who've had really good success with that sort of either multiple bank accounts or like sub accounts. Like, once again, with online banking, you have these options to set up a savings account that's just going to be my emergency savings, and I'm going to fill that bucket, and I'm going to put a couple of $100 there, a couple $1,000 there. I'm going to get to a level, and then I'm going to move on and like once that bucket is full,
Yeah.
then I'll do something else with
Yeah.
that money.
Like you could either continue contributing like, $50, $100 a month, or you could say, okay, now that I've reached my emergency savings goal, I'm going to
Yeah.
put this money elsewhere.
We're probably getting ahead of topic. Like this is probably something we're going to talk
Yeah,
about weeks
right.
from now. But it's all connected too. So it's
Yeah,
good.
totally. I mean, I guess we could kind of circle back to the DCP is obviously a great way to save through the state.
Mm-hmm.
That it is, I don't know. We could kind of talk about some of the sort of tax benefits of it. That being able to save more and to put towards retirement, because I think a lot of people think I work for the state. When I retire at 65, I'm going to get my pension and then I'll be set for life.
Yeah.
But one of the things we've started talking about at retirement and things like that is being able to look at, DRS has this great tool online that's a benefit estimator where you can go in, and even for someone like myself who's like in my mid 30s, I can go in and see kind of an estimate of what my retirement income will look like. And I didn't really do that before I started working here, even though I worked for the state
Yeah.
For a couple of years before this. And it was lower than I expected it would be.
Yeah.
So it was kind of that moment of like, oh shoot, I need to I already had a Roth IRA, but it's like, okay, maybe I should actually put a little bit more into a Roth IRA or my DCP account.
I love that tool for a number of different reasons. One is it's just pretty straightforward. It's using all your own data, and
Totally.
it just is. You can pick the dates. You can pick all the dates and kind of play around with them. But when I've talked to people who are thinking about retirement, one of my favorite things to do is use that tool. What if you quit today?
Mm-hmm.
And I actually think that's a great thing for a person in their 30s or 40s to think about. What if I just stopped working in public employment? What's my pension going to be at 65? How much
Yeah.
money can I count on from
Yeah.
this bucket of savings that I've been doing for the last 5 or 10 or 15 years?
Yeah.
What's that going to look like going forward? My wife and I actually just recently did this. I'm much geekier about retirement stuff, but it was like, let's just look, sign into your online account and see what would your pension be now? What would it be if you worked another 5 years or 10 years? And for her, it was just a big eye-opening moment of like, I don't think I want to work more than 20 years. Like that's the, beyond that, it wasn't going to have a huge impact on her pension. And it was just like, not that we make all of our decisions, though I sometimes feel like people at DRS do, we make all of our decisions based on what our pensions are going to be. But I think those are things to consider, and oftentimes, if you haven't used that tool, people just don't have a way to know what is my income going to be.
Yeah.
What's that new income going to be in
Yeah,
retirement? And maybe I think that's like you said, it can be a little bit eye-opening that it's not maybe as much as you expected.
Definitely.
It's funny, I actually sort of, over the last day or two, was thinking about, like, I sort of wanted to skip this topic because, I mean, income is, we talked about this earlier, not today, but previously, about how income is, money in general is like a taboo subject.
Yeah.
But I feel like income is even more taboo, or it's a big part of that taboo. Like I talk to a lot of my friends about retirement savings and investments, just because of what I do and what they do. It's just it becomes a pretty common conversation, but I don't think we've ever talked about how much we make.
Yeah, like specific dollar numbers.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
and in some ways,
Which is probably okay.
I think it is okay, but it can be helpful to provide context. Like, if somebody is talking about how much money they're investing, like, well, yeah, maybe they're making 3 or 4 times as much as you, and that's like, you shouldn't be
Definitely.
beating yourself up about it. Like,
Yes.
are you
I
still
think-
making percentage donations? Like that's-
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it is perspective. And luckily they have a lot of tools online now. Like I think there's this one called Glassdoor or something where you can look to see, okay, this is my particular career? What are other people in Washington State or in the Western Washington making for this particular job? And good to see this, like, where you're at. And I think that's what can be kind of a downfall once people start looking into these, like, finance books, and people are putting away, X amount of dollars towards their retirement savings, and you might look at your budget and going, oh, well, that's a lot. That would be like a third of my budget or something. But it's just about starting small, and I think just kind of making those small little steps. Yeah, you kind of touched on percentage increase, and I think that's something we talk a lot about with the DCP account, where it's like, okay, you can go in and say, yeah, I want to contribute like $120 a month, and you can just keep it steady. Or what we recommend to a lot of people is, hey, you can go in and say, I want to contribute 2% of my income or 3% of my income. And then when you do end up getting that pay raise, then that automatically goes into your DCP account. It's like the set it and forget it method.
Yeah. Well, and that's I really like that strategy of starting with a percentage, and then also thinking about, like, oh, I'm getting a 5% raise this year because I've got a promotion, or I'm going up on the teacher pay scale or whatever. Right. Well, I'm getting a 5% raise, but I'm going to put 2% of that into my DCP, and then I'm going to save. And so
that's a good way to think about it. So if you're getting a 5% raise, you're putting 2% of that more towards, maybe you increase your DCP contribution from 2% to 4%, and then you just take whatever extra money to put towards vacation, home improvement projects, your kids, whatever.
Yeah, it's like you were talking about earlier. It's like paying your future self that 2%. You're giving your future self that
2%.
Sometimes I feel like our as public employees, our pay raises, at least maybe I just don't realize this. I know some people are like, they know like when their anniversary date is, they know when those increases are happening, but because we don't get pay stubs mailed to us, we're not looking at it and seeing it all the time, because our lives are so automated now. Sometimes I think we miss those opportunities, and it's do you set a reminder on your calendar every year? I heard this technique that somebody was using where it was like every month they were increasing their DCP 1%. It was just I'm going to increase it 1% until I really notice it, until I'm really like, okay, that's too much. I need to back off of it. And I think those percentages, I like thinking about finances in general in terms of percentages. What percentage of my salary am I paying towards my car or my house? Like, because it helps put that a little bit more in context of, instead of like, well, that person's, they can afford something much more expensive. Well, they have a bigger salary. They're putting the same percentage. I'm not necessarily falling behind, I guess. It's kind of that keeping up with the Joneses mentality, trying to get away from that in terms of absolute dollar amount.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like focusing on those goals. So I've actually started to do that now with my Roth IRA account. And so, I mean, I have a goal of I would eventually like to contribute like $500 a month, but I can't afford that right now. So, I started at a certain amount, and I, from something I saw online, but it was like, you can just increase it by $10 a month.
Yep.
And so that's what I've, it does take me a little bit more time to like go into the account and change it's set up as a reoccurring contribution, but I have to change it from like, increase the dollar amount, $10 every month. But at the same time, it's that small little step that it's like, okay, I'm going to start here, and I'm going to focus on this bigger goal by start making these small increases, so that hopefully I won't notice it too much over time. And then kind of, like you said, sometimes you can get to that point of being like, okay, now I'm really at this point, okay, maybe I need to start a side hustle if I want to contribute more. But
I love that, though, because it also feels like a win. Every time it's
like okay, that's the small win. I'm like, okay, I'm proud of myself for like putting a little bit more towards my retirement savings, even if it's only like $10 more a month. But I know that like, further down the line, if I get a promotion or something, I can obviously put more in.
When it builds those habits, like we were talking about earlier as well, it
sort of helps change your mindset from what am I going to do with this money till I have a strategy, I have a plan.
And I have a goal that I'm trying to get to, and I'm going to like start with this little bottom stair down here and work my way up.
Yeah, that's, I think, I love the bottom stair, the first step on the ladder. Like, you have to take that first step before you can take the next one. And, if you try to jump 4 stairs at a time, you might
Fall down.
smack your face really hard and then never want to do it again.
Yeah.
And I think that can be what's really tough about it.